You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
Greetings, younglings, and welcome to Making Tracks Reaction Chat, brought to you by those fine lads and lasses over at fanfortracks.com. Part 3 of Ahsoka dropped earlier today, and this week's episode was called Time to Fly. But if you haven't listened to any of our previous reaction chats before and you are joining us for the first time, then welcome, and I sincerely hope you have had time to watch Ahsoka Part 1 to 3 as we trample all over the plot as we give our initial reactions to this week's episode. In other words, this is your spoiler warning. So, catching everyone up to what happened in last week's double debut episode, we learned that former Jedi Padawan and galactic wanderer Ahsoka Tano is hot on the trail of Grand Admiral Thrawn, having found a galactic map that may lead to Thrawn's whereabouts. Thrawn, the last Imperial Grand Admiral, is missing, presumed dead, after young Jedi upstart Ezra Bridger managed to whisk our blue-skinned Admiral away from one galaxy into another. The Dathomiri Night Sister survivor Morgan Elsbeth is freed from the New Republic custody by former Jedi Baylan Skoll and his Padawan Shin Hati, who are then instructed to obtain the map that Ahsoka has left with her Mandalorian ex-apprentice Sabine Wren to try and decode. Sabine and Shin face off with lightsabers, with the more experienced of the two, Shin, defeating Sabine and stealing the map. While Sabine is left recovering from her lightsaber puncture wound, longtime rebel and now New Republic General Hera Syndulla is tasked at investigating Elsbeth's prison escape, which lead her and Ahsoka to Corellia, where they learn that whilst the Galactic Civil War may be over, there are many ex-die-hard Imperials still holding a grudge against the New Republic. Some of which have helped Elsbeth secretly construct a giant hyperspace ring called the Eye of Cyan, which could prove to be the galaxy-hopping gateway that Elsbeth needs to find Thrawn. Following a tracker beacon that Hera and Chopper place on a ship destined for the Eye of Cyan, Sabine once again submits to Ahsoka's tutelage, and they, along with Hu Yang, head to Cetos to see for themselves what Morgan Elsbeth is up to. Joining me this week and every week to help with the unpacking of Ahsoka is longtime fanfare, head honcho, not Hondo, Mark Newbold. So Mark, without giving you too much time to catch your breath from watching this week's episode, what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. It was different. It was very, very different to the double blast that we got last week, and refreshing for it, I think, because it was mostly action on the face of it. I liked it. I enjoyed seeing a full-length, proper dogfight space battle. It sort of reminded me of a lot of previous stuff that we've seen before. I really dug the new vehicles. It was great to see Sabine and Ahsoka working so well together. So I enjoyed all of that. But there was more to it than just what was on the face of it. You know, there was quite a bit of detail, quite a bit of character stuff, quite a bit of story stuff being progressed. So yeah, first reaction was, yes, I was really impressed with that episode. What about you?
Yeah, it's I mean, I think on, initial first thinking about it, you're like, well, but not much really happened. It kind of actually almost felt a bit more like an Andor episode, what with the with Hera and the council, and there's a lot of kind of talking, really. But
Yeah.
I think what we got some nice character development, a nice interplay, like you said, between Sabine and Ahsoka, and their relationship from what we're seeing now is kind of slightly developing, although I don't think Ahsoka is warmed that much more than she had done in the previous two episodes. The dog fights, which we'll get into a little bit later, I have some thoughts about that. But, generally I thought it was nice that there was these touches, and whereas in the past, it's very easy to go, oh, that's so A New Hope, or that's so like something else. You kind of go, well, that's, it's not just a nod to New Hope. Let's take the training mask. That isn't just with a blast shield down, how am I supposed to fight? You think about all those different iterations we've now got of people with that mask on in Attack of the Clones. Even you could even say like Kanan in Rebels with his lack of eyesight. So things like that, kind of in some ways, it's almost like it's kind of like coalescing all these kind of like ideas that are generally Star Wars and maybe in the past would be seen as fan service or an Easter egg, but really now it's just in universe. It's just that's just life as it is in the galaxy.
You've said that a few times where people have picked on things and said, oh, that's just a rip-off of this, or that's a rip-off of that, or this storyline only works with this, that, and the other. And you've said it many times. Well, it's all Star Wars. It's all the same story. Even if you hop from comics to books to video games to movies and now television, it's all the same story. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't help but think of Luke with the blast shield down. I even said the line when I watched it. It's obvious. But as you say, it's all through Star Wars and has been since, for many, many years.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about seeing this and seeing the training that Sabine's doing is that, like, it's I don't think anybody's under the impression that she's really like a gifted Force sensitive.
No.
And I think
especially not the cup on the table.
Yeah, and Hu Yang, because he's certainly not impressed. He's given us some sass again this week, which I thought was quite nice. Because also, actually, right or wrong, or as a positive or a negative, I haven't decided yet. But Ahsoka's quite heavy, so having him with a bit of levity in that kind of monotone, kind of droid, kind of like just seeing stuff as it is quite funny, and so it kind of cuts through and kind of says stuff that we're all kind of thinking. But like that training sequence was really cool because we saw stuff that we've not seen before. And I think that's the cool thing, is that like we've seen a lot of Jedi training, but we haven't seen hardly any Jedi training, not directly, not, beyond the, maybe a master maybe telling the Padawan to kind of reach out and, visualize stuff. But this was like, lightsaber drills. And interestingly, it's very similar to the kind of the stuff that I've started to see when I go and train with Saber Guild. It's not necessarily about knowing the moves, but it's about thinking about the lightsaber as a bladed weapon. And so actually it's about the cut angles, because like if your opponent is actually stood there in armor, there's certain ways that you can cut, and if you cut in a diagonal way, you might go clean through a limb or a head or something. But if you cut like a different angle and it's not quite square, you're not going to have the same effect. So it was really interesting and really fun just to see her kind of like her lightsaber hit results when Hu Yang kind of like displayed all those different things, and also the different styles and the names of those kind of I guess moves that I don't think, although I could be mistaken, we've had specific names for some of these movements before. We have like the lightsaber forms, but not necessarily the actual specific moves. So that was cool. And maybe this is me just missing something from the Clone Wars, but it was really cool to see kind of like a Grievous nod with Hu Yang with his like 4 appendages. He's got 4 arms and stuff. Whereas I don't think I've noticed that in that droid's design before, which I thought was really cool.
It made me think, certainly that, obviously the Grievous comparison was distinct, but also maybe explains retroactively how Ben had any chance of figuring out how do you take on a guy with 6 arms, because you've got to assume Hu Yang's been around forever and a day. Obi-Wan probably trained with him, like Anakin probably trained with him.
Absolutely.
That droid's probably sparred with more Jedi than any sentient, and you've got to consider a droid sentient, any sentient creature probably alive at this point in the timeline. So he's got skills and knowledge that even Ahsoka, and they are kind of, and we've said this before, there is a sort of disparity towards droids. They are just shut up for now. Just all right, you've said your bit, now be quiet. There is that sort of almost brushing him off at times, but then when you realize, we're skipping through the episode, when they're heading towards what they at least now think is a hyperspace ring, when they're heading towards that and they're getting the scans and they're having to wait, and Hu Yang is like, just wait, longer. They do, they don't do the sensible thing and pull away and save the bacon. They wait because they know he's not just saying it for shits and giggles. He's saying it because he means it. So there is sort of a two-way balance with how they treat him. But certainly in that scene when he's training with Sabine, I found that really interesting. Also threw up a question to me as well, in that how far, hopefully we'll find out, but if not, maybe ancillary material or later down the line in a second season or whatever. But how far did Sabine and Ahsoka's training get the first time? Because Sabine is still at that point where clearly as a Mandalorian with a melee weapon, with the vision and eyesight, she's got a good chance. Maybe not against a Jedi, but against anybody else, she's going to have a fighting chance at holding her own. And you'd think that blast shield down, which was, you mentioned Attack of the Clones, that's with younglings, that's with 6-year-olds. Yeah. They're doing it. They're force talented. They've got a sensitivity. Has Sabine got any sensitivity? Has Ahsoka spotted something in her that others haven't? Because Huang's not seeing it. Sabine's not seeing it yet. The cup on the table sure as hell ain't seeing it either, which I thought was my favourite single shot of the whole episode, was just that shot of the cup. That's got to be a T-shirt. But you just
MVP for the episode.
Big time. But you just wonder how far their training got before Ahsoka either, and you said it last week when we were at the IMAX, and it really got me thinking, maybe there's more to their relationship, more of a personal touch to their relationship than we realise. Or maybe Ahsoka just got that frustrated, like this kid she just hasn't got it, and she's frustrated, and that's why she walked. So I don't know, because that cup, unless they went through an asteroid field, was not shifting from that table.
Yeah, and I think that is the one overarching. Well, there's two questions there that I would like to see answered by the end of this season, anyway.
Yeah,
which is why, and then, as you say, how. So why did Ahsoka feel that she needed to train Sabine? Because, as we said, she's a formidable ally. Is this some kind of thing that she's had some kind of vision of the future and knows that she needs an ally?
Yeah.
And for whatever reason can't rely on Luke Skywalker or anybody else who might be force sensitive in the galaxy still floating around. But it feels like, because I don't know if it's if this is to do with the whole Ezra Bridger connection, because there's a direct connection to Ezra, between Ezra and Sabine, whether or not that she's needing that connection to move on. So that's quite interesting. And then obviously, like you say, it's a how, and it would be really good. And the obvious thing, or the obvious story choice would be to have Sabine walk away, to be the one who's frustrated. But turns the paradigm a little bit if it's like this. If it's the teacher who's like, do you know what? You're rubbish.
But don't you think it's a bit like Obi-Wan last year, when we all assumed that it would be Obi-Wan looking after Luke, and it was Obi-Wan looking after Leia, and it was just that little wrinkle that just made it work.
This is it, isn't it? And this is what has been really good about a lot of Star Wars storytelling, is that it's subverting the expectation, but not subverting it in a way that is throwing the whole galaxy upside down on its head. It's staying faithful to the lore. It's just given us a different perspective, a new certain point of view to view the story through a different lens. And if that really should be one of those ideas and themes that they should be talking about before they even have shot a megabytes worth of film. They should be talking about that when they're at the scripting stage, which is clearly what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. So skip it ahead to there's only really a couple of scenes in this, it feels like anyway, in this episode. The next real big thing is Hera and her conference with the council.
Yeah.
It's great to see Genevieve O'Reilly take this this role again, in a slightly different time period to what we've seen in Andor. And I think they've kind of ever so subtly, although it's harder to tell through the holocam, have aged her up a little smidge, just to kind of give that slight passing of time and everything. But what's really interesting, and I found myself sat there watching this kind of going, wow, it is so much like history. It's just constantly repeating itself.
Yeah.
Not only from the Old Republic, but also then what we see Leia goes through with the rise of the First Order, when in 30 years' time that starts to happen. And I thought that was really interesting, and for us, because it's kind of that dramatic irony, we all know roughly where it's going to head to. We've seen this 2 or 3 times already, so we know where this is heading. So it's really interesting to see how blinkered people still are, having had this happened once or twice before in the past.
I love the fact that we saw Mothma. I also found it fascinating, considering that the story of Andor is not finished yet, and we don't know how season 2 plays out. But we know chunks of her timeline, and of course, the most recent to this is Jedi, which is a fairly brief scene, and it's great. Being it wasn't, I don't believe it was on a headquarters frigate this time, but it was on another capital ship, so that was interesting to see her a rebel briefing room again, and Mothma kind of in it. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah,
But that was very fun. But that being said, she seems way more compromised this time. She's not the sole, not that she ever was, but she's certainly not the sole leader of the Alliance now. She's part of a council because there's a Senate again, you would assume. And just hear her, I mean, a bit more heart on her sleeve than we're probably used to. I think it's in these sort of scenarios with Hera, she reacted quite sparkily, but she really called that one guy out when she said, did you pick a side or did you wait till the winner had sort of become apparent? Love that moment.
Exactly. And because the one scene that so far kind of like, made me think of was from Rogue One, where Jyn is there and Mon Mothma is there with the other leaders of rebellion. And kind of, again, well, really, I think actually it's not so much Mon Mothma being shouted down, it's more Jyn. But again, it's like, the louder voices seem to kind of like carry the weight and the argument. And that dude is that meant to be a nod to resistance?
It said Kazuda, didn't they?
Yeah, and what's his face's dad is, I think, it's a senator, isn't he? He's a senator for the planet. So I think that's probably that would make sense. And if it's Kazuda is kind of like it feels like a fairly unique name. So
it was good to see a Gran there as well, because in Phantom Menace you had Axmo, who was up for running for Chancellor, and so you've had the Gran senators always seem to be fairly prominent in sort of major galactic moments. So that I thought that was a neat little moment. But just seeing Mothma obviously adds another layer of. Yeah, we're definitely in that. We're not that. I mean, we are, but we're not that far past Return of the Jedi. The galaxy has changed. And also, we always think of Endor. We still think of Endor and the Death Star battle as being the end of the war. But we know that there was the Battle of Jakku that came after that, and then it really fractured. But now it's clear that they are very conscious that there are still pockets of Imperials out there. And we saw last week in the second episode that Toil and Trouble, that there are Imperial loyalists in important positions that have still maintained their sort of power bases, if you like. And yes, they shut that shipyard down in Corellia, but on the galactic scale, big whoop. You just wonder how invasive they are. And if a Thrawn came through, which again is just the underlying bubble of everything that's happening in this season, how will he unify them? How quickly will he unify them? But the bottom line is they're petrified that he will. Clearly, Hera makes it clear, very clear.
Yeah, exactly. I think she's seen him up close in action, so she understands like his brilliance. And I think almost like what happened in that control room at the shipyards, where literally you just had a mini uprising as soon as the Imperials kind of fired up. I think if there was going to be a coup, it would happen pretty quick.
Yeah,
I think once Admiral Thrawn is present, I think to a degree it will happen. Because again, it's like, and also it's how subversive it is, isn't it? It's how they can derail the efforts of a New Republic government subtly in ways and turn, or even down to turn the populace against them. It could even just be a propaganda thing. Like, look, your galaxy's in turmoil. With the Empire, you had order. You might have like an Imperial stormtrooper like boot across your neck, but you had order.
Yeah.
So, and the trains run on time, people get eat and all that kind of stuff, and they can smooth over it that way. So, it's that scene I think was interesting, and what was really nice was obviously she mentioned Jason, and then we actually get to see Jason, which is quite cool.
It was cool.
So that's quite fun, and again opens up some questions about maybe her and her parenting style, i.e. We assume that he's going to be force sensitive. He's half, you could say half Jedi.
Half Jedi, yeah.
So it has Ahsoka maybe approached Hera about training Jason. Maybe Hera's kind of said no, that's not for his life or something, because like he clearly knows about the Jedi, so he clearly must know about Kanan and where he's come from. So you think that at some point maybe that is somebody who could potentially, I say, go to Luke's academy, but we also know what happens to Luke's academy, so maybe we don't want him there. I mean,
that's true. That's true, but it does beg another question, that you've got this whole situation with a New Republic, and they seem to be inactive rather than proactive, certainly, which, again, as you say, decades down the line, a couple of decades down the line, leads to the initiation of the Resistance. So we kind of know where that pathway is going to go. But this Republic doesn't have, not the armies of the Jedi, but the Jedi did become generals against their wishes, essentially. It's not what they were for. That's not what they wanted. There aren't any Jedi really at this point. There's people like Ahsoka around. Of course, Luke Skywalker's still around. And they've not really nailed down exactly when this story takes place. We know it's after the season 2 episode of Mandalorian, where you first saw Morgan Elspeth, but we don't know if it's before the Book of Boba Fett episodes. So there's a possibility in Ahsoka that you might see the first meeting between Luke and Ahsoka. We don't know that yet. We don't quite know where they're setting this. Is it post season 3 Mando? I don't think it's been quite nailed down. So no. there's a nice sort of vagueness there that means we can't jump too far ahead in our sort of suppositions, just take it week by week. But just for this sequence, this Rebel Alliance or New Republic sequence, you feel the frustration of Hera. And clearly you see that hologram on board Ahsoka's ship, and you see more Sabine surprised than Ahsoka. I think Ahsoka's kind of almost beyond being surprised by anything at this point. But Sabine, like, what? They're not helping? Because you've got a history. There's a history. You mentioned the scene in Rogue One. That is galactic history at this point. That's 10 years before. And that's something that's, people would know about that moment before Scarif, and that Mon Mothma was there, and she kind of knowingly smiles at Bail Organa as they go off and do it anyway. So, you do kind of feel like you need that.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
We have a rather long and drawn out space battle in this week's episode, which is quite fun, I thought. It did make me kind of question whether or not the bad guys had their blasters set to like training blasters.
Yes.
Because I mean, that T6 ship took a lot of hits.
It did.
And that's quite an old ship as it is. So I mean, obviously it's a bigger ship, so the turbo lasers that ship has got is going to be more powerful compared to the smaller kind of like fighter. Which do you know, I mean, it looked very similar to again, like the General Grievous ship. Was it the Soulless one? I think
the Soulless one.
Was a Bellabub dead snub fighter or something like that. I can't remember how to say it exactly, but yes, I've written about that before for Build the Millennium Falcon, so I should know that. But yes, it did. It had that sort of the body, certainly the main hull of it. It didn't seem to have quite the same engines, because they're broader and stockier, but the body of it looked very similar that Shin was flying. The other vehicles did have more of a, like you say, almost like it's like you'd see. You mentioned Resistance earlier. The ships in that were more like training ships and lighter vessels and speedway type vehicles. They didn't pack a punch like you would expect. It's more because they were so fast. I mean, they did look a bit like Mustangs. They had that sort of World War II plane vibe to them, which I really liked. But I like the longer, protracted space battle. We've seen lots of space combat in Mandalorian, but it always feels very quick and done. It's very quick. And like I said, it's very quick. It's very fast. And maybe this is just down to the fact that maybe they thought that where they were building the Eye of Sion was so remote and so out of the way that actually they probably weren't going to get bothered by anybody. And maybe like those blasters were just, I don't know, just there, just
warn people off.
Warn people off, and just for like low level security protection rather than anything else. But they kind of stumble on this whacking great big hyperspace ring, which we've kind of had confirmed now, which is cool. And that was nice. It's very easy to get to get bogged down with kind of like how quick and easy some things sometimes are in some like sci-fi shows about getting a quick scan, but having to really kind of build a detailed picture does take time. And so having that as a kind of like a ticking clock, shall we say, or a countdown, kind of ramped it up, because I never really felt, and I don't know if it's just me in my age now, whereby I know that really Ahsoka and Sabine is going to get to be the next episode in this kind of scenario. I never really felt there was much peril when it came to actually how those ships were going to cause them any real kind of like grief. And in some respects, just felt like it was just a way to kind of almost move them on to next week's episode, you know. So, but that, I mean, there's some good back and forth between Sabine and Ahsoka, and it's great to see Sabine in the ship on the guns, and also not be as good, because I'm pretty sure like when she got in front of the guns, or behind the guns I should say, Rebels should like knock out a TIE fighter like that. So the fact that she was struggling and was fighting against what Ahsoka was trying to do in the cockpit, and that, I thought again kind of meant that they needed to kind of like stop working by themselves and start to remember to work together towards a common goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she did say when she sat in the cockpit, "You changed my settings," you know.
Yeah.
So I think in the Star Wars galaxy, you would have your own setup for certain things, and the technology, it's always so attractive to look at. I love, for example, Star Trek technology. It's great. It's always visually interesting, especially these days. You can kind of see there's a logic that follows what we've got, but like way out in the future. You look at Star Wars, you look at what Sabine was looking inside that HK's head last week, and it's bolted in wires and screws. There's some little magic gizmo inside that makes these droids as smart as they are and move and do what they do. But you can see it's literally nuts and bolts. You saw it in Phantom Menace with Anakin when he was building 3PO. So I love that sort of hardware analog feel to it. And clearly Star Wars vehicles are that. But I think sometimes you've got to just assume in the same way, skipping ahead a bit, but the same way that Ahsoka is literally doing cartwheels on the top of that ship and deflecting laser bolts, and people would go, well, she's in space. No, she's actually high up in the atmosphere. You know that because you see the smoke come off the ship and the lasers as it's firing. You know it's in upper atmosphere. But she's also a Jedi. So even though she's floating off the ship at one point, you just think she's just going to use the Force to pull herself back. It's the Space Mary Poppins thing again, isn't it? But done infinitely better. So you've got to sort of assume that different planets have slightly different physical rules, and different things can happen, a bit of leeway for things like that, I think. And also it just looks so freaking cool. But yeah, I really enjoyed the battle, and the interplay between pilot and gunner was really well conveyed. I thought it was really well played.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, it didn't have the kind of frantic energy of, say, like the Force Awakens between Rey and Finn, but then you're not going to with Ahsoka, who is, and I think this is one thing that I think people forget. It's like, I think they are comparing Ahsoka from when she was like 15, 16, compared to, she's going to be what?
Mid-40s.
Mid-40s. So there's going to be a whole, God, if you compared me now to 16-year-old Mark, actually don't do that. But that's clearly my point. In case we're two different, almost literally like two different people.
Yeah,
you've lived a life between those two ages, so that's going to affect how you kind of come across to people. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was really fun. I quite liked actually the going out into space. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was kind of done to the point, and they knew where the line was and didn't necessarily overstep it. I really liked it, and I was kind of expecting her to kind of like float back in, but then to actually need like Sabine's assistance to kind of like get her back in, I thought kind of grounded it a little bit. But again,
but how did she get that spacesuit on so quick, Mark? I mean, getting the Montrolls in the helmet as quick as she did. I mean, that wouldn't take 2 seconds,
had like
would
a
it?
Covering, didn't it?
Yeah.
The Montrolls had like this nice kind of like big kind of like bag kind of like stuff and that. But yeah, I mean, knowing how long it takes me to get into my space suit when I do Rebel Legion troops, it was, but hey, that's just for fun. But it was nice. It was a nice crisp suit. I mean, I like the colours and that, the blue and the white kind of popped with that, and and just also just you kind of think, well, clearly these bad guys haven't really had much experience, because surely, Ahsoka's a small target. You still take on the ship, because if you destroy the ship, she's stuck out in space. So what's she going to do? So, but that was fun, and again, kind of like reminded me ever so slightly of Rey in Rise of Skywalker doing a backflip and taking like a Kylo's kind of TIE silencer wing off, that kind of thing. So it's all kind of stuff that like we've kind of seen, but just kind of done in a different way and in a slightly different context. So it feels authentic Star Wars, whereas the first time you see it, it always feels a little bit new. It always feels like everybody's kind of like jumping the shark a little bit, but now you can go, oh, that's totally fine. Yeah, that's cool. Wicked.
There was a moment when they got hit and they were sort of tumbling and they went through a hyperspace ring. And I don't know why, but I thought, are they going to appear somewhere else?
That's what I thought as well. That's exactly what I thought. I thought, are they just going to end up in this other galaxy? And that's going to be the next 2 or 3 episodes. But yeah, I'm guessing the hyperspace ring isn't complete yet, or at least they haven't put in the coordinates. Because like when you see Balin Skull down on the planet, he's got like some packing crates around him and that. So it looks like they're probably they're going to make a move soon, but they're still not necessarily ready. I mean, I think probably the only kind of downside to like my only minor niggle with this, it did feel like the ending was slightly underwhelming. I felt like the end wasn't really the end, and I was like, really, is this it? But then again, we don't know what we're going to get next week, and I think,
and we've just had Purgils. We've just had Purgils,
yeah, and that also raises questions in itself, doesn't it? About like Marek and that, and he clearly clocks them, and are you buying into the Ezra Bridger theory, the film theory?
I like the fact that people are talking about it and throwing up other characters as possibilities as well.
Galen Merrick
Merrick's been mentioned a lot. I've seen Reva mentioned weirdly from Kenobi. So there's other names that have been thrown out there. I think the most obvious one that people have thrown around is Ezra. I personally hope it's a completely new character that we've never seen before, or maybe a background character from a comic. Somebody noted a similarity between the costume of Merrick and then a costume that was shown of a character in the background in one of the Vader comics, an Inquisitor character. So fairly similar, but they are all fairly similar. So I don't know. I'm happy to be surprised, but I'm also happy for it to be completely new.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, me too. I'm not 100% sure if my own like headcanon and like kind of like series logic, I don't quite know why he would embed himself, unless of course it is purely because he knows that they're going to find Thrawn and this is his chance to get close to Thrawn and then finally kill him if he hasn't already, which he clearly hasn't from the trailers, spoilers. But yeah, I almost wonder if Ezra is that little bit, that one step too obvious. You kind of think that this kind of reveal will be fairly big and coming. I hope it's just like a new character, or but somebody who's got like a really decent backstory. Really.
Yeah. And interesting, when they got the ship going again, they're waiting for Huang to come around. They managed to get the ship on the ground and just drop silent, turn everything off, even the droid, and the vehicles fly over. I liked the whole feel of that whole sequence. Just the fact that, well, now they're on Dinab, and what do we do next? What's the next plan?
What's the next game? Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. Well, I guess they've got to go and they've got to repair the ship and figure out what is actually there, and is there anything on the planet beyond that kind of like that? I guess like you could say that temple, that map temple, and because at the moment they're on the back foot. They don't necessarily know as much as I think Elsbeth Morgan does.
No.
With respect to the map, so they need to kind of catch up. So whether or not, again, that means that they just happen to hop on the ship and they end up in the other galaxy, or they find out. I mean, that there's lots of different ways this can kind of play out. And
there was an interesting line as well when Huang mentions about that massive hyperspace ring and how they're using Superstar Destroyer hyperspace engines basically, and there's like 9 of them, so it's clearly crazy powerful. And depending on the vehicle that's going through or going backwards and forwards, but also mentions that ancient Jedi texts talk of pathways between galaxies. That is totally new ground. That is fascinating to me. That I don't know. I just wonder, because you've got to think of the future of Star Wars as a project, as a series of stories. is it going to be the case that now we've introduced a brand new galaxy, that in that new galaxy, presumably there's just as many planets as there is in what we know as the Star Wars galaxy? Are they going to try and start telling stories over there? It's still Star Wars. It's the technology is going to be different. Will it even feel like Star Wars? Am I just reaching, thinking ahead way too far? Who knows?
In other words, are we expecting a long time ago in another galaxy far, far away?
Exactly. Exactly.
But I mean, and is this is this their kind of maybe slightly more subtler attempt to kind of create rather than a multiverse, like a multi-galaxy? For lack of a better term, I mean, so much could change. I mean, or interestingly, maybe the Force doesn't work in the same way as it does in two galaxies, and we find out, because again, the metaphysical kind of like realities don't necessarily work. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't need to conform necessarily to exactly the same thing. Maybe this is like, again, reaching into the depths of legends and stuff. Maybe this is where the Yu Zhong Wong come from, and actually the whole galaxy is completely dead of the Force. There just isn't any Force there, and it's something that's unique to that galaxy. But I mean, surely if you're sat there and you own like Marvel and the Star Wars Publishing, you're kind of rubbing your hands, thinking, "Oh, great, we can start doing spin-offs in that, our own stories in that new galaxy." And just kind of like write a whole new history, which would be interesting. However, do you think, or could it make then our galaxy that little bit smaller because of it?
I think, and I've said this a couple of times, I think they've made our galaxy smaller by changing the time it takes to traverse it. They've made it so that you can go from one corner to the other relatively quickly. It feels like traveling from, top left to bottom right in the Star Wars galaxy now you're talking hours, maybe a couple of days. It doesn't feel like a real journey anymore. And presumably the people with the most power in the galaxy, now that seemingly anyone can travel around it in minutes, is having the coordinates. It's knowing how to get from A to Z. It's not how it used to be, where, and I'm talking West End Games roleplay, so that's its own thing to a degree, but it always gave you a decent framework of an idea of how long things would take to get from A to B. I do think a lot of things get taken way too literally in Star Wars, especially when you go back to A New Hope, as we did discuss in this week's Making Tracks. So I don't know. That is one question I'd like to know a little bit more about. But yeah, introducing another galaxy, to me, as a lifer at this point, if you start telling stories set in another Star Wars galaxy, is it still Star Wars, really? If Tatooine's not in that galaxy, if Alderaan never got destroyed, if Coruscant's not the center of that galaxy, is it anything to do with Star Wars? If it's all new characters, I don't know if that's going to hold any interest for me personally. But then again, I think maybe we're reaching. I think it's a plot device. I don't think they're going to want to go and tell new stories. There's way too many stories to tell in the existing galaxy. So whilst it's caught me on the hop a little bit, and I wasn't expecting a new galaxy, it's the old "in Dave we trust" thing, isn't it? I think he's set this up for a very good reason. So I want to know what that reason's going to be. Hopefully, it'll start to play out in Ahsoka. I don't think it's going to be completely wrapped up and completed in Ahsoka, but I'm intrigued. Certainly intrigued.
Yeah, and next week, I believe, with part 4 is the halfway mark
Already.
I know. There is always a downside to a double episode or triple episode drop, in that it does seem to kind of like make you speed through the series that little bit more.
Wasn't so bad with Andor, was it, when we had 12 episodes?
Yeah, exactly. 12 episodes is the right length, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with Obi-Wan, it felt short. Again,
It did.
I suppose it all depends, if you are aching for more Obi-Wan adventures, or if you were kind of sat on the fence thinking, I wish this was just a feature film. So, but that is for another time.
If you want to be part of the action, visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Layer, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.